Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at reflective equilibrium and how it can help us to make some sound moral judgments. Sounds like, a mental workout for your moral compass, if you will.
Yeah.
We'll be focusing on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on the topic, which, builds on a concept developed by John Rawls.
It's really interesting stuff. This reflective equilibrium, it really gives us a systematic framework to navigate ethical dilemmas. And it helps us to, move beyond just relying on gut feelings.
So it's more than just what feels right. There's deeper analysis going on here.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Reflective equilibrium is kind of like this balancing act where we weigh our considered judgments against general ethical principles, making adjustments until we reach a state of coherence.
Okay, I like that. A balancing act. So let's break that down a bit further. What exactly are these considered judgments?
Good question. Considered judgments are those that we make when we're at our most rational and informed. So imagine you're facing a very complex ethical decision, and you've gathered all the relevant facts. You're thinking clearly and calmly, and you are genuinely motivated to determine the most ethical course of action. The judgment you arrive at in that scenario is what we call a considered judgment.
That makes total sense. So it's not those impulsive reactions we might have when we're, tired or emotionally charged. It's those judgments we arrive at after careful deliberation.
Exactly. But sometimes even our most considered judgments might need some tweaking as we delve deeper into ethical principles.
Okay, so how did these ethical principles then come into play? Do we just pick and choose the ones that resonate with us?
That's where we get into wide reflective equilibrium. This idea stresses the importance of considering a wide range of ethical frameworks. We might consider things like utilitarianism, Kantian ethics, virtue ethics, and various other philosophical perspectives, and analyze all their different arguments and implications.
So it sounds like we're taking those considered judgments and putting them through a rigorous test against these different ethical systems. So is the goal here to find that one perfect principle that aligns perfectly with all of our judgments?
Not necessarily. It's more about creating a coherent and well-grounded ethical framework. And as we start to look at these different principles, we might find that some resonate strongly with those considered judgments, while others challenge assumptions and force us to reevaluate our positions.
So it's a process of refining both our judgments and our understanding of ethical principles and constantly seeking a state of equilibrium between the two.
Exactly. It's very dynamic, and it involves back and forth adjustments. We might revise a considered judgment because of a compelling ethical principle, or we might find that our initial judgments lead us to favor certain principles over others.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting for me. What happens when our considered judgments clash with a well-established ethical principle? How do we decide which one we need to prioritize?
That's a key challenge in reflective equilibrium. It requires us to consider very carefully the arguments and justifications behind both our judgments and the principles in question. We might need to examine the specific context of the dilemma, or explore potential exceptions to the principle, or even consider revising our understanding of the principle itself.
Yeah, it's a process of weighing the strengths and weaknesses on each side and seeing if we can arrive at a resolution that maintains the overall coherence of our ethical framework.
Gotcha. So it's not about blindly following those rules or clinging to our initial judgments, but it's about engaging in this process of reflection and refinement.
Exactly, and cultivating intellectual humility and being open to revising our beliefs in light of new insights or perspectives.
This is all very intricate. Are there any practical examples of how this might work in real-life situations?
Sure, let's consider the classic ethical dilemma of lying. Suppose you believe that lying is always wrong, but then you're faced with a situation where telling a lie might save someone's life.
Ooh, that's a tough one. How would reflective equilibrium guide us there? Well, we would examine our considered judgment in this specific case, which might be that lying is justified to save a life, and then we would compare this judgment to the principle of honesty.
And if those two clash?
That's where the real work begins. We might explore different interpretations of the principle of honesty. Considering whether there are exceptions or qualifications. We might also delve into the potential consequences of both lying and telling the truth, weighing the potential harms and benefits.
So we're not just tossing out the principle of honesty altogether, but we're trying to see if it can be reconciled with our considered judgment in this particular case.
Exactly. It's about seeking that balance between our general principles and our judgments in specific situations.
That makes sense. Now, you mentioned earlier that wide reflective equilibrium involves considering a wide range of ethical frameworks. Could you elaborate on that a bit more?
Sure, let's say we're grappling with the issue of animal rights.
Okay.
We might start by considering our considered judgments about how animals should be treated. We might believe, for instance, that it's wrong to cause unnecessary suffering to animals.
I think most people would agree with that.
Indeed, but then we might start to explore different ethical frameworks to see how they approach animal rights. Utilitarianism, for example, would focus on minimizing overall suffering, which might lead to arguments against factory farming or animal experimentation. Kantian ethics, on the other hand, might emphasize the idea that animals are not rational beings and therefore don't have the same moral status as humans.
So different ethical frameworks can lead to very different conclusions about the same issue.
Absolutely, and that's why it's crucial to engage in wide reflective equilibrium to explore these different perspectives and see how they challenge or support our considered judgments.
This all makes me wonder about the potential for disagreement. What happens when people go through this whole process of reflective equilibrium but arrive at different moral conclusions? Does that mean the method has failed?
That's a common concern, and it's important to acknowledge that reflective equilibrium doesn't guarantee that everyone will reach the same moral conclusions. However, even in cases of disagreement, the process itself can be very valuable. By engaging in reflective equilibrium, we're forced to articulate the reasons behind our beliefs, to examine our assumptions, and to consider alternative perspectives. This process of self-reflection and critical thinking can lead to greater intellectual humility and a deeper understanding of the complexities of these ethical issues.
So even if we don't all agree on every single issue, at least we're having a more informed and nuanced conversation.
Exactly. And that's a crucial step towards building a more just and ethical society.
And I'm curious about the role of personal biases. In this whole process, we all come to these ethical dilemmas with our own unique experiences and perspectives. How do we ensure that our considered judgments aren't simply a reflection of our own biases?
That's a crucial question, and it highlights the importance of being aware of our own biases. It's a challenge we all face when we're engaging in moral reasoning.
So what can we do to kind of mitigate those biases?
Well, one crucial step is to actively seek out diverse perspectives. If we only surround ourselves with people who share our views, we're less likely to challenge our own biases. Exposing ourselves to different viewpoints, even those we might initially disagree with, can help us broaden our understanding and identify potential blind spots in our own thinking.
So it's about getting outside of our echo chambers and engaging in open-minded dialogue with others.
Precisely by engaging with different perspectives, we can test the strength and coherence of our own beliefs and potentially refine our considered judgments in light of new insights.
This all makes reflective equilibrium sound like an ongoing process, a constant journey of refining our ethical compass.
You're exactly right. It's not a one-time exercise, but a lifelong commitment to intellectual and moral growth.
Now, we've talked extensively about reflective equilibrium at the individual level, but how does this concept apply to groups of people or even entire societies? Is there such a thing as like a collective reflective equilibrium?
That's a fascinating question, and it leads us into the realm of public reflective equilibrium. It's the idea that just as individuals can engage in reflective equilibrium, so too can groups of people, communities, or even entire societies.
So instead of just trying to find equilibrium within our own minds, we're trying to find it within a larger group.
Precisely, public reflective equilibrium involves a collective process of deliberation and dialogue, where individuals share their considered judgments, explore different ethical frameworks, and strive to reach a shared understanding of what constitutes just and ethical behavior.
That sounds like quite a challenge, especially in today's world where there's so much disagreement and polarization.
It certainly is, but it's a challenge worth undertaking. Public reflective equilibrium offers a framework for navigating these complex ethical issues, for finding common ground despite our differences, and for building a more just and equitable society.
So it's about finding a way to balance individual autonomy with the need for shared values and principles.
Exactly, it's a delicate balancing act, but it's one that's essential for any society that aspires to be both just and harmonious.
This has all been incredibly thought-provoking. So we've explored this concept of reflective equilibrium from its individual applications to its broader societal implications. But I'm wondering, are there any potential downsides or criticisms of this approach that we should be aware of?
Of course, as with any philosophical concept, reflective equilibrium has its share of criticisms and challenges. Some critics argue that it's too individualistic, that it places too much emphasis on personal judgments and not enough on objective moral truths. Others worry that it can be too easily manipulated by those in power to justify their own agendas.
So it's not a perfect system, it has its limitations.
No system is perfect, but despite these criticisms, reflective equilibrium remains a valuable tool for navigating the complexities of moral reasoning. It encourages us to engage in critical thinking, to be open to revising our beliefs, and to seek common ground despite our differences.
It sounds like a process that requires both intellectual rigor and a deep commitment to ethical dialogue.
Exactly, and it's a process that's essential for anyone who's serious about living a moral and meaningful life.
It's been so interesting learning about reflective equilibrium,
Hmm.
unpacking the core principles and seeing how they apply to specific situations and to society as a whole. But, as always, we've only just scratched the surface.
True. And reflective equilibrium is a concept that invites you to just keep reflecting and refining.
Absolutely. So before we go, I want to leave the listener with one last thought, something that builds on what we've talked about but pushes it a step further.
Oh, I love it when you do that. Hit me.
We've talked so much about the importance of considered judgments as, the starting point for this whole process. But here's what I keep coming back to. How do we know those considered judgments are truly well-informed and free from our own biases?
Right. Because even when we try to be totally rational and objective, our judgments can be shaped by things we're not even aware of. Our background, culture, personal experiences, those can all subtly influence our moral intuitions.
Yeah, like those biases are lurking in the background.
Yeah, exactly. They might be shaping our considered judgments without us even realizing it. That suggests we need to be even more careful in examining our own judgments. We can't just assume that a gut feeling is right. We have to ask ourselves where those feelings come from, whether they're based on good reasoning and evidence.
So we almost need a kind of meta reflective equilibrium, right? Like a reflective equilibrium about our reflective equilibrium.
Yeah, it's about constantly challenging those assumptions and being willing to revise our beliefs, in light of new information or perspectives. It's not always easy, but it's essential for growth.
So it sounds like a lifelong journey of refining our ethical compass.
It is, and a journey worth taking. The pursuit of a well-examined life, guided by thoughtful principles and considered judgments, can bring meaning and purpose to our existence.
Absolutely. And for those of you listening who've been on this journey with us, I encourage you to check out the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on reflective equilibrium. There's a lot of great information there.
And don't stop there. Keep exploring and questioning and refining your moral compass. The world of ethical inquiry is vast and always changing.
Well said. So until next time, keep those minds engaged and keep reflecting.